to begin by calling to order the Tarrant County's Commissioner of Court. Clerk, call the roll.
Glenn Whitley, County Judge.
Here.
Roy C. Brooks, Commissioner Precinct 1. Andy Wynn, Commissioner Precinct 2.
Here.
Gary Fickus, Commissioner Precinct 3.
Here.
J.D. Johnson, Commissioner Precinct 4. Constitutes a quorum.
Okay, as long as there's three of us together, we do that. So, and we did post the meeting, and so with that, then, have we heard from Stephanie? With that, then, I'm going to go ahead and call to order the Tarrant County Election Commission. Clerk will call the roll.
Glenn Whitley, County Judge.
Here.
Ron Wright,
Here.
Tarrant County Tax Assessor. Mary Louise Garcia, County Clerk.
Here.
Steve Maxwell, Tarrant County Democratic Party.
Here.
Stephanie Click, Tarrant County Republican Party. Constitutes a quorum.
Our first order of business is the approval of the minutes of our October 4th, 2010 meeting. And I believe each of you have a copy of those minutes in your file. No, you don't have.
I'm sorry, I do. Sorry.
Can I have a motion?
Motion to accept the minutes, October 4th, 2010.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Did you convene the commissioners' meeting too? You have your quorum present?
I've already done it.
Oh, you did the commissioners' meeting? Okay.
First item is, or the next item is to discuss the Open Meetings Act applicability to this commission.
All right. I have a handout for you all, if I may approach. And it kind of combines this agenda item with the next agenda item. So if I can start at the top, just to put in context the discussion of the Open Meetings Act, the role of this commission is very limited. The commission is limited to the hiring and firing, basically, of the elections administrator. And I have given away one too many of my handouts. All right. So you see on the first page, the Election Commission appoints or, by 4/5 vote, and with removal of Commissioners Court, terminates the employment of the Tarrant County Elections Administrator. That's what you do. Everything else that you do is not the business of this commission, okay? And the reason I tell you that as we get to discussing the Open Meetings Act is it's not to discourage you from meeting. I think it's great that you all get together. I think it's great that you're brought up to date on what's going on. But when we talk about the application of the Open Meetings Act, that's what's governed by the Open Meetings Act. Brand new law. Until recently, the Open Meetings Act did not cover this commission. There was explicit law that said you were not covered. If we were paying attention, we saw what happened in Dallas not that long ago, and I think that magically appeared this law shortly thereafter. Okay? So the point is, not only do you have to post when you're going to have a meeting that deals with the employment status of Mr. Rayburn or his successor, you have to actually serve him personally 72 hours before the meeting. That's a very unusual provision of the Open Meetings Act. That is specific to this commission. So it's not enough that you post it. It's that you must serve him personally. In this particular meeting, Mr. Rayburn has agreed to accept service by email. Correct, Mr. Rayburn? And you did receive email? Yes. So for the record, Mr. Rayburn has been served, and that will be something you will want to make sure of anytime that you meet and you're discussing either great job or, hey, we've got a problem, either one. All right? Now, because the Open Meetings Act applies, you have to do the training. Now, I know that Judge Whitley has done the Open Meetings training, and I believe Ms. Garcia has, Mr. Wright has. I know that you have. Yes, you sent me the I don't think I got the certificate back.
I have not completed it.
Okay.
I will have it done by the end of the week.
Okay, and I also sent the link to Ms. Click, and it's also in your handout. The date that you need to finish it by is the 17th of September, and I can explain the calculation if you care, but otherwise do it by the 17th of September. And then Mr. Rayburn needs a copy of your certificate. Now, you don't have to redo it if you've done it before. You just get a copy of the certificate that you have and make sure that he gets a copy of it for his files relating to this commission. The training, I have already apologized to Mr. Maxwell for the truly tedious violin music that's in the training. It's become something of a joke between open records lawyers how horribly bad the contracted music was. Mr. Wright, you seem to recall the training.
I just did it last
Yes, it was not good. It was not good music. But anyway, that's how you know if someone has truly done the training. You just ask them, what'd you think of the music? And if they say it's okay, you know they did not do the training. But get the certificate and give it to Mr. Rayburn. This group has often been kept updated on election issues by Mr. Rayburn by way of emails, especially as we get heavily into the election season. I don't think there's any problem with continuing to do it because that's not the business of this commission, therefore you're not violating the Open Meetings Act. Now, if you start back at him with, hey, that's just really bad and we need to talk about whether to keep you on, that's a problem. But if he's going to let you know, hey, we've got this problem with elections, this is what's going on, this is how we solved it, this is a uniquely worded law for you, and I think you can still be kept ahead on all of those issues that we normally keep you all up to date on as the elections occur, and even on Election Day, as you know. Mr. Maxwell, I know you and Ms. Click and certainly the judge and probably y'all get updates when we have issues that need to be corrected on Election Day or near Election Day, and I think that can continue. I don't think this particular law is so narrow, I don't think that runs you into any trouble. So I wanted you to be aware both of this new law, the unusual personal service provision of the law, the need to do the training if you have not done it, and also the very limited scope of this commission. Everything else you do, everything else you discuss is advisory. Okay, it's not something that you have any true power over, but because of the composition of this committee and who's on it, you know, you've got your two-party chairs, you have your county clerk, your tax assessor, and your chairman, your county judge. It matters what you say, even if you don't have the kind of power over it as a legislative power. Do you have anything to add about the role of the commission? Do you have any questions? Yes, sir.
If the commission meets like we are right now, not specifically to talk about Steve Rayburn's employment or his continued employment, but to talk about the duties and how he's exercising those duties of his office, or how the office is operating, do you see that as being
I do. Anything that would be like a job evaluation, because actually this committee doesn't set his salary. There are some commissions that not only appoint but set salaries of their appointees, but y'all don't. You just appoint.
Hold on one second. Do I have to recess now that we're okay?
No, we're good. We're good. Thank you. I think that anytime you're doing that, and if you're also particularly impressed with what a great job he's doing, I think you can one-on-one tell him that, but if you start getting into groups of 3 to tell him that, you need to post a meeting. So speak up when you get the chance, and otherwise, if you want to, you know, address something that you think is an employment problem or even just really great group kudos, you really do want to be posting it so that you comply with the Act. Yes. And any questions on that? Any questions on the Open Meetings Act? And again, my apologies for the music, but Mr. Maxwell, you'll know soon enough. All right, we'll sit down and then we'll move on to the next agenda item.
Steve, the next item is to just kind of give you, and I think we've pretty well done that, an overall view of the role of this commission. So are you going to discuss again the election code? Which one are you discussing?
I'm here to talk about the Senate Bill 100. And
okay, so that's item 6.
If you guys are ready to
Go.
hear us beat that dead horse one more time. Well, I think you probably all have heard the background. Federal law changed sometime last year. It was the Federal MOVE Act, Military and Overseas Voters Empowerment Act. It did a lot of things, but how it really affected us was that it creates a new requirement that we must be able to mail ballots to overseas voters and military voters at least 45 days before Election Day. It was effective in the fall of last year, and so we did that. We complied with that in November of 2010. Well, it had to be addressed in the legislature for our even-numbered years because the MOVE Act is applicable to federal elections, including the primary and the primary runoff, and of course the county's general election. But in past years, there was not 45 days between the primary and the primary runoff. The primary has traditionally been the first Tuesday in March. The runoff was in early April. So there's less than 45 days for those runoff ballots to be sent to the military and overseas voters. So the legislature addressed this by changing the primary runoff election date into May. So our primary runoff now is the fourth Tuesday in May. And of course, the complication is that the city and school elections remain on the second Saturday in May. So within 10 days, we've got two elections. And of course, that's further compounded by the fact that elections are no longer one-day events. We have, early voting before every election, and so, we will have early voting going on for the city and school district elections. Then the election that will end on a Tuesday. That Saturday is their election day, and the very following Monday is the beginning of early voting for the primary runoff elections. So that's what's created a real difficulty for our department. We began early on by saying that we did not see a way that we would be able to continue to conduct the city and school district elections. Senate Bill 100 changed some things fundamentally in state law. It gave us the right for the first time to tell these other political subdivisions that we would not be able to conduct their elections. And it gave them some opportunities to change their election dates or change their terms of offices. They could change to the November election. They could change to May of odd years. They could continue to hold May elections in even-numbered years if we can accommodate those, or they could rent or purchase their own voting equipment. So those were some changes that came about in Senate Bill 100. And so we initially just did not see a way we would be able to move forward in conducting those political subdivision elections next year. But there was a lot of feedback from the cities and schools that they really wanted to stay on that cycle of every year May elections or their even-year elections. And we looked at what some other counties were doing, went back to the drawing board and figured out that we would be able to do it if we could convince the parties to have a joint election. Initially, we said the primary, but really the crunch election is the primary runoff. If we can get the parties to share voting equipment in that election, that solves our equipment constraints. We're going to have to do some other things as well. We're going to have to purchase some computer servers to accommodate our early voting needs. We may need to buy a little bit of voting equipment for early voting, but that's all doable in our eyes. We still have a constraint with the election day equipment, but of course the Commissioner's Court took some action last week to address that. And Judge, you may want to.
Basically what we decided to do last week was to go forward, and we would provide limited equipment for the primary runoff elections, and that was the action that we took as a court.
So the law says, I thought last week when y'all were talking about this, Ann said if a municipal says we would like you to hold our election, we have to do it.
In the past, that's been true.
And I just keep going. I just want you to know I'm here.
A little bit different between counties that have an elections administrator and counties where the county clerk conducts elections. In the counties where elections are conducted by the county clerk, that county clerk has always had the right to tell those political subdivisions, I'm not able to do your elections. An elections administrator has not had a similar privilege. An elections administrator has always had the duty to contract with other political subdivisions for election services. When Senate Bill 100 came about, it carved out a special exception for the May city and school elections in even years only. And so as an elections administrator for the first time on that one date, I do have the ability to say I'm not able to contract with you.
Okay. But there is no such similar right to turn down the parties if they ask. If the parties, if the Democrats ask Steve and the Republicans, or one or the other or both, ask Steve to run their primary, he cannot turn them down to run that primary. He can turn down the cities and the school districts if it's during that same election season and there's an inability to handle everybody. Now, when the cities moved, if they moved to November or they moved to another year, then he would again be in a position of not being able to turn that down.
And if he cannot turn down the Republican and Democratic parties, can he at least be able to say, I'm going to combine them? Can he say he's going to combine them? We're going to do this. You've asked, but here are the parameters?
No. There are two things that kind of enter into that, but the short answer is no. Okay. To have a joint election, the Commissioners Court has to agree by majority. Mr. Rayburn has to agree. So far, no problem. And both political parties have to agree. The chair of each political party has to agree. Now, as a practical matter, I suspect that they wouldn't be likely to agree unless their constituent precinct chairs were on board, but it's the chairs of the two political parties have to agree in order to do that. Now, one thing that the court can do, the Commissioners Court can do, is to limit the number of voting machines made available to either or both political parties, looking back to the last election. And in order to do that, that is one way to basically apportion machines across entities, is to say we're limiting or we're setting the number of machines that we're going to make available in this primary. And that's what the court did. The court set at what was expected to be about 250 machines, which is what is expected to be available when you accommodated the cities and the school districts.
For the runoff election.
For just the runoff. Right. There is no problem with the primary other than you're going to have people voting in a different place for the runoff than in the primary, but that's kind of seen as the lesser of evils, right?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, quite honestly, I do believe that with this new law and with the extensions of time on this, potentially you're going to be voting from the middle of February to the middle of June. You're going to have a lot of, I think, voter fatigue, and, you know, by the time they get to the end of it, they're going to be extremely frustrated.
I think also from what I've been reading about this law is that there was an expectation by the legislature that cities and school districts would perhaps be more cheerful about moving their elections to other times of the year or other years. And I think that the reaction that we've seen almost universally in Tarrant County has been sort of contrary to that expectation by the legislature. They do not want to change what they're doing.
Steve, go ahead.
Well, I think that's the Senate Bill 100 dilemma in a nutshell. And I think, that we've been working very hard to find solutions that make everybody happy. I'm not sure how successful we are in pleasing everyone in this situation. We do have a meeting Wednesday afternoon again with all of the cities, school districts, other political subdivisions have been invited to attend Wednesday afternoon in the Family Law Center. We held a meeting with them a couple of weeks ago to discuss potential solutions. Those seem to be narrowed, I think, now that Commissioners Court has taken some action. So I'm not sure what else you want to hear from me, Judge.
I think that about covers it. We did get a text from Stephanie saying that she'd had car trouble, and that's the reason she's not here. Any other questions that y'all have at this time?
Yes. The effect of the court's, I guess, ruling, the court's order, decision, whatever, from last week, was to basically cut the number of machines that would be available to the two political parties for runoff elections only from approximately 450 or 440, as I recall, to what, 225, did you say?
250.
250.
All right, leaving approximately 200 machines that would then be available for municipalities or school districts. Is that basically right?
I think that's my understanding.
All right, so I have two questions about that. The machines that would then be made available by that decision for the municipalities and school districts, are they sufficient in number to cover their elections?
The cities and school districts, yes. We typically have around 200 polling places every May for their elections. So that should be approximately the amount that's necessary.
If the two political parties are left with approximately 250 machines for the runoff elections only. Based on your past, well, let's just assume a countywide runoff election for one or the other of the parties. Where does that 250 machines fit into how many polling places would be open for the runoff election?
All right. The answer is it depends, and you're being a lawyer, you understand that. It depends. If it turns out that you have both parties who are in that vote, which is unlikely, but it's theoretically possible, that would be one thing. If you had a situation where you have only one party that has a runoff, that's quite simple, because then you could have 250, in that situation. So I think the answer is it's going to just depend on what you have, and which I know is not the kind of answer you're looking for, but that's really the correct answer.
Well, I think you kind of answered my question. If there is a countywide election runoff for both parties,
Right.
then based on the number of polling places that we have had in previous runoff elections, would we be using approximately 440 voting machines in that runoff election?
If you did not have, my understanding is, yes, if you did not have joint runoff elections, you would find yourself in that vote.
All right. Now, we know that the turnout for runoff elections is significantly less than it is for the primary election.
Even more significantly less than I thought when I started looking at numbers, yes.
Is it necessary to have all of the same polling places open in a runoff election, even if it's countywide?
No, of course it's not. Of course it's not. But that's going to depend in part on what the parties are willing to do. If the two parties came together and said, listen, we are not going to agree to joint runoffs, but we each agree to ask for 100 and however many machines, that would be doable. But you may not have that kind of agreement, okay? And so then you may...
If you don't, from a standpoint of what we're,
required to do. Required to do. You are required to provide the Democrats with 29 election polling places.
And that's based upon what calculation?
That is based upon the number of votes in the last election cycle. You didn't have a runoff because then it would be 0, and I don't think that's right. And we're not going back to 2008 because then it would be 4 machines, and I don't think that's right. But last election cycle, there were 29 Democratic precincts that had 100 or more votes. So they're entitled, if they want 29, they're entitled to 29 if we have 29. Okay? Now, using the same math, the Republicans are entitled to 368 election machines. They have never asked for 368, nor would I expect them to. So if they had 220 and the Democrats had 29, we would have met the statutory minimums. Now, do I think that that is necessarily set in stone? No, that's what happens if nobody can agree and everybody insists on, the maximum. But agreement between the parties would probably bring you to a different number, or a joint primary would bring you down to, a more manageable number, that more like 220. So it's rather dependent on the primaries. Again, last primary, there was no county runoff, and 29 would have been more than enough machines to deal with that situation. So, and it could be the reverse this time. It could be the Republicans have no county runoff, and they might not need very many machines. So it's just all going to depend on what happens.
But within each party, they could determine what precincts they wanted to combine into the runoff for that particular party.
How they apportion those 29, whether they put them scattered across, I think it's up to them.
But if we sat down with the Republicans, who potentially could have 300 and something, and they said, we're going to combine all these precincts and we really only need 150. Then, or vice versa. Right. Either way, we could, as long as they can come together and apportion those 250 correctly, then, or agree upon that 250, then there's no problem.
Right. Right. The risk that the Republicans are going to demand 368, I think, is almost 0. And the Democrats may very well want more than 29, but 29 can be defended with just looking at the law. So I think that part is not, it's a starting place. And then you have this pool, and where you go from there, I think, depends on the fair needs of the citizens of Tarrant County and the amicable resolution between the parties, in which we have some optimism, and we'll look for that.
Okay, one other
Yes.
question.
Sure.
Can I just add on to what she said there? There are other counties that do, have situations where their parties further consolidate the polling places in their runoff elections. And I think that's the question you were asking. It is common in some other counties that they do that. They sort of see what races they've got on their runoff ballot, and they may have more polling places open in areas where they're expecting a higher turnout, and in areas of the county where they're expecting a lower turnout, they open fewer polling places.
Steve, are there other counties in this area that have similar machines that like the ones we're using?
Denton County uses the same equipment. There are a number of counties that.
So there's also that possibility that if there were not runoffs in some of those other counties, that we might be able to borrow machines from them.
Well, the only problem there is that the vendor generally inserts something in the contract that prevents us from doing that, prevents us as a county from leasing or loaning our equipment to another county. They made exceptions for that last year when we loaned our equipment to Harris County because of their fire. It was such an unusual circumstance that they allowed that. But I think that there are contract provisions that keep us and the other counties that use their equipment from leasing that out.
I'd like for you to look into those under the contracts and determine whether or not that is the case, and then maybe do some inquiring with regards to the vendors about that. That would definitely impact, or that might be one of the RFP items on our next bid for contracts and for machines.
You had another question, sir.
Now, this is specifically directed to you and to Marvin.
All right.
Is there the possibility that limiting the number of voting machines to the two political parties is a violation of the Voting Rights Act because it acts so as to disenfranchise some voters?
And that is a question that we don't know the answer to. It certainly complies with the statute. I've done a lot of reading on that. I have not seen any kind of action where they're indicated anyone even made that argument. I've seen nothing. I don't know of any entity that's ever given less than the statutory minimum either. So I think that offers some kind of protection. Is it possible someone might make the argument? I suppose somebody could make the argument, but that's sort of an untested argument. Hopefully that's your answer, that response to your answer. I mean, if I had to guess, I would say no, but can I tell you that there are no chance at all that someone might be able to raise that argument, which is why probably when the Democrats and the Republicans decide what they're going to do about that, then they're going to need to pre-clear that. And it could be that, for instance, one party says, well, we're not going to do a joint election. We're going to go forward with our 29 machines. And it's possible the Department of Justice might say, well, you have the option to go joint and you need to do that. So that's a possibility that you get some Department of Justice pushback. But that would be at the time when you and your party or the Republicans and their party seek to pre-clear their runoff. All right?
Any other questions or comments at this time? Anything else? I think that's everything on our agenda. Is there anything else? Anybody, any other questions or comments anybody wants to make? If not, then...
Judge, could I just welcome Ron and Mary Louise to the commission? This is their first meeting on our election commission, and worked with each of them a little bit already and looking forward to many years to work with them.
And if you haven't gone out, it will probably be well worth your while to go out and view everything out there and look at the operations. And we have in the past had the meetings out there, but because of the desire to stream the video on this one as well as other things, we decided to go ahead and have the meeting here this time. So,
Judge Whitley, before you adjourn, I do have one other question for you, Steve. Have you been able to determine the reason for the resistance by the municipalities or the school districts to either moving elections to odd years like the city of Fort Worth does it, or moving them to November when I think you and I exchanged emails at one point might save the county $600,000 or $700,000 if they did that?
I think that the opposition boils down to a couple of generic reasons. We have a number of cities and some school districts that have 3-year terms. And to make a change to the November election would they don't want to hold their elections at the same time as partisan elections, especially with the straight party selection on the ballot, fearing that their election may be, just kind of lost in the clutter of the November election. They have options for changing the length of their terms to go on May odd years, and a lot of them find that undesirable as well because of the changes that would require, especially those that right now have staggered elections. A lot of them have, a few terms that run this year, a few terms that run the next year, and so on. So I think that's been their major objections to that.
Let me add, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Something to that, because I'm a former city councilman. The judge is a former school board member. We both run back then in nonpartisan elections. And people can debate, till the sun goes down whether they should be or not, but the fact is they are. And there's it's a much smaller pool of voters that vote in city and school board elections, much smaller. And those voters, that set of voters, want them to remain nonpartisan. I'm speaking about moving the election to November 1st. And they want to keep it nonpartisan. And they have a lot of sway on that argument because they're the ones showing up to vote. And they believe if you move a nonpartisan election to coincide with a partisan election, even if you still continue to call it a nonpartisan election, it's no longer a nonpartisan election. And so it's almost, that May election for them is almost sacrosanct. As for doing away with, going to, only the odd number of years. I served in Arlington. We have elections every year. I didn't particularly like it that way. I would have preferred what Fort Worth does. They're all up at the same time in Fort Worth. In Arlington, they're staggered. And that was a tradition set many years ago. The voters like it and want it that way because there's somebody with some experience always on the city council that way. As someone who's kind of been there, I wanted to respond to that. And again, to the people that take the time and effort to actually vote in a city and school board election, which is a much smaller pool, those are very important things.
And I would echo just those exact same sentiments. Partisanship has not done us well at either the state or the federal level, I don't believe. And I think if we try to put the city, the municipal, and the school board elections in there, I think that's the main objection, is what they see as the results of the partisan elections. The other thing that I would add is I think right now there is the reluctance to move to the 4-year terms because for many of them it would cause a charter election by lengthening their terms. And they feel like that there is distrust right now, public distrust of elected officials, and they're not willing to go out there and propose longer terms at this point in time. And so that's another thing that, I do believe that we go down the road a couple of election cycles with this long election period beginning in February and going through June. They may begin to look at the possibility of, we're even getting less turnout for our municipal elections and for our school board elections because of the, because of all of the votes, the different locations. That may change them somewhere down the line. Because, I thought that would be the easy thing too, but it's just, they're not looking forward to charter. Some of them, if they were probably all looking at charter amendments and changes to their charter, they might throw that in. But I think they're going to want to be able to say, we've heard from our citizens, they don't like the February to June deal. They would like for us to change and move to an odd number year, and maybe after a couple of cycles they'll move to that area.
If I could make one more observation, I've noticed there's some really strong feeling on both sides of this when you talk to people about this. If you talk to people who are with one political party or the other, they have strong feelings. If you talk to the cities and school districts, they have strong feelings. But I've noticed that from the political party's perspective, well, it'd be real easy for the cities to solve the problem by just moving. And from the cities and school districts' perspective, it will be real easy for the political parties to solve the problem by just having joint elections. So both kind of sides have a real easy solution for the others to do that is just unacceptable to them at this point. So I've just noticed that, and I believe it to be quite sincere all the way around. But that, I think, also comes into play.
The one common thing that they all have is that there's no reason to spend $3 million to cure the problem.
And I have heard everyone agree on that. So that's the one thing I think
It's
everyone...
$3 million for equipment and $2 million for space. So
Right.
everybody agrees we shouldn't spend $5 million.
Right.
There's just different solutions from this.
Correct.
Well, and in the spirit of friendly discussion, you're exactly right. Nobody wants to see that. And I think there's another common goal. We all want to see the voter turnout at municipal and school board elections increase because it's abysmal. It truly is. And running elections from the third week of February into June, where you basically have a vote of some kind going on nearly every day, I think only adds to that. And so that's what I was wondering. Houston has gone to November municipal and school board elections, have they not?
The city of Houston and Houston Independent School District have held their elections in November for a long time.
Has that proven to make those into partisan races?
I'm not sure. I couldn't answer that question.
Do you know what it's done as far as how the turnout in percentage of registered voters has changed once they did that?
I'm not sure, and I don't know when they made that change. As long as I've been around in elections in Texas since the late 90s, that's when they've conducted their elections.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the folks that we've talked with as far as the cities, I mean, they're pretty adamant about not going to the November. At least the ones I've had a chance to.
Mary Louise and Ron, I would just invite you guys to come out to the election center sometime, and we'll be glad to give you a grand tour.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anything else? Then I will adjourn the Tarrant County Elections Commission meeting, and I will adjourn the Tarrant County Commissioners Court.